In a kingdom by the sea, a king made a vow. Every night he would take a new bride, and every dawn he would have her killed. For 3 years it held. Then one woman walked into his palace willingly, knowing the blade was waiting for her by morning. She was not brave because she had no fear. She was brave because she had a plan no sword could cut. Tonight, dim the lights and let the night carry the tale. This is the oldest story in a book of 1,000 others, the frame that holds them all. Long before Sinbad set sail, before any fisherman ever hauled a sealed jar from the sea, there was a king consumed by betrayal and a young woman who understood something he did not. That a story, told the right way, can be worth a human life. Her name was Scheherazade. And this is how she turned a single unfinished tale into one more sunrise, and then another and another, until she had outlasted a king's murderous vow and saved every daughter who would have come after her. Once, in an empire whose lands stretched as far east as India and China, there ruled a king named Shahryar. His name alone made lesser rulers tremble. No army could stand against him. No border could hold him out. He had everything a man could conquer, except the one thing he could not command, which was the loyalty of the woman he loved. His first wife, the queen, betrayed him. He discovered it himself, and the discovery did something to him that no battlefield ever had. It did not merely break his heart, it broke his faith in the whole of womankind. If she could betray him, he reasoned in the cold logic of a wounded man, then any woman would, given time. And so Shahryar resolved that no woman would ever be given that time again. He would never be made a fool a second time. He would never let another person close enough to wound him. From a king's grief, a monstrous policy was born. He decreed that he would marry a new bride each night, spend that single night with her, and at first light, before the sun could fully rise, have her put to death. A dead wife could not betray him. A wife who never saw a second morning could never grow to despise him. It was the reasoning of a man who had mistaken cruelty for safety. For 3 years the vow held and the kingdom bled. Night after night a young woman was brought to the palace as a queen, and morning after morning she was carried out as a corpse. The task of finding these brides fell to the king's vizier, his most trusted minister, the man who carried out his commands. Imagine the horror of that office. Each day the vizier had to go out among his own people and choose a daughter to die. Noble families lived in a terror that never lifted. Mothers hid their girls. Fathers sent them away in the dark, smuggled them to distant cities, did anything at all to keep their names off the king's list. The streets that had once been full of life grew quiet. The city that Shahryar had built his power to protect was being hollowed out from the inside by the very man sworn to rule it. And there seemed to be no one who could stop him, because who challenges a king? Slowly, inevitably, the supply of brides ran dry. The noble houses were emptied of their daughters, and the vizier, returning to the palace each evening with growing dread, knew that soon there would be no one left to bring. No one, that is, except the women of his own household. The horror was closing in on the man who had been forced to administer it. The vizier had a daughter, and her name was Scheherazade. She was, by every account, unlike anyone else in the kingdom. She was beautiful, yes, but that was the least remarkable thing about her. She had read deeply and widely. She had studied philosophy, the sciences, the arts. Most of all, she had collected stories. 1,000 books of tales and histories of ancient kings and old legends, and the wisdom of those who had lived before her. And she did not merely own these stories. She knew them. She carried them in her memory, whole and complete, ready to be told. She was witty, she was wise, and her father treasured her above anything in the world. Which is exactly why, when Scheherazade came to him one day and announced her decision, the vizier's blood ran cold. She wished to be given to the king as his next bride. To her father, those words could mean only one thing: a death sentence freely chosen. He begged her. He pleaded. He reasoned. He forbade. He wept. He told her every terrible thing that would happen at dawn. But Scheherazade had not made her choice in fear or in despair. She had made it after long thought, and her resolve did not waver. She had not simply decided to die. She had decided to act, to save not only herself, but every woman who would otherwise follow her to the executioner's block. She had a plan, and against all his protests, her father, bound by his own office in his daughter's iron will, had no choice but to bring her to the king. On the wedding night, Scheherazade was brought to the king's chamber, as so many had been before her. But where her predecessors had wept and begged for their lives, Scheherazade did something none of them had thought to do. She asked the king for a single favor before the night was through. She had a younger sister, she said, a girl named Dunyazad, whom she loved dearly. Would the king permit her sister to be brought to the chamber so that the two of them might say their farewells before the morning came? It seemed a small and harmless thing, the last wish of a condemned woman, and Shahryar granted it. But the request was not what it appeared to be. It was the first move in a plan that had been arranged in advance, down to the smallest detail. When Dunyazad arrived, she waited until the quiet of the deep night settled over the room, and then she spoke the words she and her sister had agreed upon. She begged Scheherazade to tell one last story, a tale to help pass the final hours before dawn. And the king, lying sleepless in the dark, found that he did not object. Let her tell her story, he thought. There is time enough before the sun. He could not have known that he had just stepped into a trap built entirely out of words. And so Scheherazade began to tell a tale. It was a marvelous story, vivid and strange, full of wonders and turns the king had never imagined, peopled with figures so alive that Shahryar forgot, for a time, who he was and what he had sworn to do at dawn. He listened. A king who had grown deaf to every plea found himself leaning into the voice of the woman he had condemned, hungry to know what came next. And then, just as the story reached its most breathless, most gripping point, the moment when the listener cannot bear not to know what happens, Scheherazade stopped. The first pale light of morning was touching the edge of the sky. Dawn had come. The king demanded to know the ending, but Scheherazade only lowered her eyes and said there was no more time. The night was over, and her life, she knew, was forfeit. Shahryar was caught. To keep his vow, he had to have her killed at sunrise. But to have her killed at sunrise meant he would never, ever learn how the story ended, and that he could not bear. And so the king made a small exception to his unbreakable law. He would let her live one more day. Just one. Long enough to hear the end of the tale the following night. He told himself it changed nothing. He did not yet understand that he had already lost. The next night, Scheherazade finished the first story, and the king, satisfied at last, prepared to enforce his vow. But before dawn, she had already begun a second tale, more thrilling and more suspenseful than the first. And when the morning light crept in, that story too hung unfinished, suspended at the very edge of its revelation. Once more the king could not bear to lose the ending. Once more he spared her, for one more day, and so it went. This was the strategy in its entirety. Not a single brilliant story, but an endless, unbroken chain of them. Each tale opening a door into the next, every dawn arriving at the worst possible moment to stop. Within one story she would plant the seed of another. A merchant's peril would give way to an old man's tale. A fisherman's catch would unleash a spirit with a story of its own. The cliffhanger was the weapon. The unfinished ending was the blade that turned the king's own curiosity against his cruelty. Night after night, the woman who was supposed to die at dawn instead bought herself another sunrise with nothing but her voice and her endless invention. And as the night stretched into months, something the king never planned began to happen inside him. The man who had built a wall against all human trust was being pulled, story by story, back into the world of wonder, of love, of mercy, back into the company of another human being he had not killed. This is why her story is the most important one of all, and why it comes before every other. Scheherazade's nightly survival is not just a clever escape. It is the frame that holds an entire world of stories together. Every famous tale that would come after, every voyage and every genie and every hidden treasure is one of the stories she told to live, to see another day. She was not only the teller of the tales, she was the reason the tales exist at all. And there is a deeper triumph buried in it. When Scheherazade walked willingly into that chamber, she was not gambling only with her own life. She understood that if no one ever stopped Shahryar, the killing would simply continue, daughter after daughter, with no end. By surviving, by making herself indispensable to a king who had sworn to destroy her, she did something no army and no minister had managed in 3 years of slaughter. She stopped it. She outlasted the vow itself. The wise and the patient had triumphed over the powerful and the cruel, and not with a sword, but with a story left unfinished. That is the secret she understood that no one else in the kingdom did. That the right tale, told the right way, broken off at exactly the right moment, can be worth more than any weapon ever forged. But to understand how she truly held the king spellbound, you have to hear the tales themselves. the ones she told in the dark to buy each new morning. And on the very first of those nights, with dawn still hours away, Scheherazade began a story about a poor fisherman, a man who cast his net into the sea 4 times each day to feed his family. On that morning, his net came up heavy, not with fish, but with a sealed copper jar, stoppered with lead and marked with an ancient seal. Inside it was something that had been waiting for centuries to be set free. And what the fisherman did when he pried that seal loose, and what came pouring out of the jar, is where our next story begins. So light a lamp and come back after nightfall, because the tale of the fisherman and the sealed jar is one you do not want left unfinished. If these old stories are the kind you want told to you in full, slowly, and after dark, then subscribe to Nightfall Tales and stay for the next tale. The night is long, and there are 1,000 more to tell.